Hello and welcome to another episode of An Imperfect Leader, Leadership in After Action, a series where leaders look back at decisions they've made and consider a series of questions. I'm Peter Stiepelman, I'm your host, and I'm an imperfect leader. I spent more than 20 years teaching and leading, first in the Oakland Public Schools in Oakland, California, and then in the Midwest, Missouri to be exact, where I was a teacher and a principal, an assistant superintendent, and then the superintendent of the fourth largest district in the state. I'm constantly striving to learn from my experiences and from the experiences of other leaders. The aim of this podcast is to lift the learning and lift the imperfect leaders up. That way, when you hear the term imperfect, you'll see strength. Strength from the candor needed to recognize imperfection as a real advantage. Let's get started. The purpose of this podcast has been about supporting aspiring and new and even established leaders, and I've usually avoided talking to new superintendents, and then I met David Geurin. And David is a new superintendent, and he also has so much wisdom to share. His wisdom includes a blog that he maintains, and one of his blog posts that I asked him to share with us was about sharing vulnerability or about sharing failure. And it says something like, and I'm paraphrasing, that sharing success is one thing, but sharing failures is inspiring. And I thought that was so true. The superintendency is a highly political position, one that leaves really little room to admit failures. For some leaders, historically, the system has not allowed them to lead with vulnerability. Sharonica Hardin reminded me of that in episode 5 of this very podcast. David takes a stand on vulnerability, that we can't be experts in every area, but we do need to model what it looks like to learn and grow and to work to be even better. It was the promotion of that mindset of resiliency that has definitely adjusted my thinking, that new superintendents have so much to share that they absolutely should be a part of this podcast. His after-action review topic is the role that superintendents might play in helping teachers navigate conflict with an abusive community member, and it's really some really good learning about when do you step in? How do you coach? He has been a high school principal. He was one for a really long time, and he noted that he's a beginner again. That mentorship is a really important part of this transition into the superintendency. I think you're really going to enjoy this. Today on An Imperfect Leader, David Geurin is my guest. He's been the principal of a national blue ribbon school. He's been honored as a principal of the year for his region. And in 2017, he was surprised and honored to be recognized as the National Association of Secondary Schools Principals as a digital principal. He's in his first year as a superintendent of Fair Play School District in Southwest Missouri. And David has been humble about his successes, crediting a growth mindset and a culture of collaboration in his school. More than anything, he finds ways to give the best learning opportunities for students. So David, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
I'm so glad you're here. Now, David, this podcast was designed for aspiring new and established superintendents. And you're a new superintendent. So in a one-word flash, what's one word to describe how it's been going?
My word would be invigorating. I think that it's challenging, but it's been challenging in a way that has really energized me. And I think I needed that. Sometimes we need that next opportunity, that next step to really kind of bring new life into the work that we do and what we're trying to accomplish and give back to education.
That is clearly a good definition of invigorating. So, David, I've really enjoyed reading your blog, and I imagine in your new role, you found ways to live this quote that you wrote. I've since learned that excellence is not the same as success. That true excellence is a mindset, a desire to serve, a belief that helping others leads to best outcomes. It's not about what we accomplish, but how we can become valuable to others. So what are some ways that you've done that as a principal and in the role of a superintendent?
Well, I just think that's so important. To see an opportunity, to meet a need, and then to step in and find ways, whether it's, you can meet the need maybe through your role or also finding others who can help to do that. I just think that's so important in supporting the work that's going on throughout, an organization. And so, specifically, I think coming out of COVID, I'm really trying to support teachers and the way that they were experiencing things, the challenges with learning. I think that was huge, that we really tried to focus on that. And then as my new role as a superintendent, I've just focused so much on trying to build relationships, get to know people, really understand and value the good things that are already going on in the district. I think it's so important for people to know that someone is seeing their good work and is showing value to that.
So it sounds like, when any of us are applying for a new superintendency and they ask, what are some of the things that you're going to do when you first get hired? And you say, I'm going to listen. And that's a nice answer and a good answer, an appropriate answer. And one piece is, so how will you do that? And it sounds like really living that value that you've just, what I just read about you is something that you do, is that really getting to know the people in your organization. Anything from a large organization to a small organization, it doesn't matter. It's all the same in terms of getting to know the people who make the organization run. A superintendent can lead a vision, but they can't lead alone. They have to lead with others.
Absolutely. So I think just trying to be present and visible and available to different groups in our school district has been one way that I've been able to do that. And it's been great. It's been fun getting to connect with people, and they're very proud of their school and their community. And you just have to ask a few questions and people are more than happy to tell you about the great things.
So in the leadership model that I've been using to advise others, there is a dimension called leaders learning work. And inside that dimension is a term, serving as lead learner. Serving as a lead learner means that you learn alongside the people in your organization. You never send people to trainings that you're not willing to do yourself. And serving as a lead learner also means that you admit when you make a mistake and then you learn from those mistakes. And I wonder, before I ask you my question, will you read what you wrote in your blog, because it speaks exactly to being a lead learner?
You bet. So share your failures and admit your mistakes. Be humble. Be honest about your struggles. As John Maxwell says, when we share our successes, that may be impressive. But when we share our failures, that's inspiring. Your resilience in the face of setbacks is inspiring to others.
That was such wisdom. I was so pleased when I read that. I felt a real connection to you and who you are. Resilience is also a part of the leader's learning work. And I wonder, would you tell us why this quote resonated with you?
Well, I think sometimes leaders feel like they have to be perfect and they can't have any vulnerability, any chinks in the armor, so to speak, and they have to be experts on every topic, which is just impossible. That's an impossible standard to have, and it's not healthy or helpful to your organization because people don't need to see you as the person who has all the answers. They need to see you as the person who is modeling how to learn and how to pursue answers and how to pursue growth and excellence, and that you're there to support them and cheer them on when similarly they step into the ring with vulnerability and are willing to admit that, hey, I can be better. Yeah, it's not to say that I'm not doing a good job, but I can be even better. I can be more effective if I continue to grow and learn. And so just really trying to promote that mindset, I think, is one of it's that lead learner idea that you mentioned. It is a key part of, I think, leadership in any organization, but certainly in schools.
You came very close to quoting Brene Brown's Roosevelt's Man in the Arena speech. But it's so true, right? It's about that person who's in the arena, who's getting the work done, who gets beaten down, who gets back up, but is there trying each day to get better.
Absolutely. I'm sure that quote was echoing somewhere in my mind there too, as I was thinking of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great quote, one that I think any one of us who are in these roles sort of digs back and anchors ourselves to it, because like my next question for you, how does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you?
Well, I think it is, in a sense, validating and it takes some of the pressure off. It validates the idea that, hey, when I make mistakes, it's okay. Imperfect leadership can still be good leadership. It is good leadership. And trying to create a image that is just impossible to even live up to, is not helpful. So I think we need to embrace imperfect leadership. We need, I think your people in your organization, your teachers, your principals, whoever's working underneath you, when they see that type of mentality, they're going to be more willing to take risks, to make mistakes, to recognize that, hey, it's okay. We're all doing the best we can, but we need to be trying. We need to be pushing the edges of what our capabilities are, so that we can find out the areas that we can continue to grow and learn.
An Imperfect Leader, Leadership in After Action is supported by ILAA, a firm dedicated to supporting aspiring new and established leaders. For more information, please find them at human-centeredleaders.com. We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader, called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. My guest today is David Geurin, Superintendent in Fairplay, Missouri. In this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they had to make, and then we just discuss it. So, David, what happened?
Well, as I was thinking about this, of something that over the last couple of years stood out to me as I wish I would have handled that differently situation. I was thinking about COVID and just how difficult those times were. We were trying to build it on the fly with, remote learning and these kinds of things, and parents and teachers, and everybody was just on edge. And there were so many times that we had interactions happening sometimes between parents and teachers that were not positive. And teachers, we have to handle those, educators have to handle those. But there was one in particular that, in hindsight, I feel like the parent really went over a line a couple of times. And I wish I would have done more to step in and really kind of take that off of the teacher. I always tried to support the teacher, and I was working with the parent some too, and definitely defend. But I think sometimes we need to say to a parent, like, that's not okay. We're not going to talk to someone here or anywhere else like that. That comment, this type of language is not acceptable. And I think I just could have done more to do that. And I think I realized it when my own interactions with the parent were also so difficult that I think I was feeling more what the teacher was feeling, and just reflecting and thinking, man, she probably needed me to step up more than I did in that situation. So I just think the big lesson there is people that are in our care as leaders, they need to know that we're in their corner and that we're willing to stand beside them, and not just sometimes coach, because I was coaching her. I was saying, well, you could say this and do this, and don't get offended by that. It's just, just see the message underneath. She's just upset or whatever. But I think that teacher really needed me to say to that parent, and know that I said that, like, that's not okay for you to talk to this person like that. And I did not do that at that time.
So it's interesting. You raised some really important points. One is that we recognize in public education that we are going to interact with lots of different styles, and that often a parent who may call or email or even come in person, that sometimes the way that they present, if you distill it all the way down to, like, they're really worried about their kid, and the way it's manifesting is in this shouting or insults or those types of things. And so you look for those nuggets, those gold nuggets, to say, okay, this is really what the issue is. Now let's try to resolve that. And it sounds like you were doing a lot of coaching to say, look, one of the things we do is we don't take it personally. We work really hard to try to resolve the situation. And at the point where you were getting involved, it didn't matter. The same type of anger and just insults being thrown at you really gave you insights into how the teacher was being treated. And so looking back, you're saying, man, I wish I had stepped in sooner. I guess one of my questions is, so what got overlooked in that process?
Well, I think my philosophy had kind of been what you're saying is, we're professionals. We have to be able to handle these things. I want my teachers to grow in their ability to navigate conflict and to not take things internally. But that's hard, when some of these things are being said that are just not helpful and very, kind of almost aggressive kinds of language that's being used. It wasn't necessarily I mean, I think if it had been profane or something like that, then it would have been an easier decision. Like, hey, we're not going to do that. I would not want anyone to be dealing with that. But it wasn't quite to that level. But I think it was at a level where I could have stepped in and done more, just to make the teacher feel like they were being defended in a healthy way. I think some parents feel like, well, the school is just defends everything and there's no openness to critique. We can't be that either. So there's this balance. It gets really difficult. And of course, those things can extend to, other levels of the organization too, besides just the parent teacher thing. But I do think like finding the way to be able to mediate and work through those and definitely support your people while also keeping that listening and understanding and trying to see what the in perspective taking. That's really important as well. But again, in my reflection on that, and since I've actually had a situation similar to that here, my new role as superintendent still had to do with the parent. And I did have that conversation with the parent, and it went quite well. But I felt better about the fact, okay, I have said, hey, this kind of thing is not going to be helpful, and it's actually going to create a relationship with the teacher potentially. The way I was able to talk to them about it, they didn't get offended, and they understood that they needed to tone down some of the way that they were communicating what they were requesting.
So you stepped in sooner this time.
Stepped in sooner this time. Yep.
Well, it's interesting because I think any of us who have been in leadership for some time can look back 10 years ago. The role of social media was not as dramatic or as involved as it is today. And so the email to the teacher that and then the response, and then it is immediately shared with the entire world. Whereas issues used to be resolved within just the small confines of parent and teacher and potentially principal and then maybe superintendent. Now everybody wants everybody to see what's going on in their interaction. So
absolutely,
it certainly adds another level of complication. So when we look at these issues, we often look back and say, okay, so what did I learn about relationships, or what new relationships were formed? What would have been the case for you?
Well, first of all, relationships are everything. Even in that situation, it was the teacher and the parent, me and the teacher. All these different dynamics are at play in that, and how we are going to relate to each other. What does that even mean, relationships? Well, it's how we relate to each other. And the success of a school is based on, and even how much we get accomplished is based on, how do individuals in this puzzle relate to each other? Is it in healthy, productive, beneficial ways, or is it in ways that are tearing that down? So for this particular instance, what I learned was that by my not stepping in and being more supportive, I think the result was that I had a teacher who was feeling very overwhelmed, demotivated, and quite frankly, unsupported. Even though that was definitely not my intention. And so I think we need to, as leaders, we need to tune into that. Like, we may have, oh, this is what the right thing to do is, but how is your teacher or the person under your leadership experiencing that? Not that we can always just fix that, but at least we need to be aware of that. And I don't think I realized it until a little further down the path, how the teacher was actually experiencing and how difficult and how much of a heavy burden that situation was for her. And that hurt me, that's how she was experiencing that.
Yeah. I'm curious on what that conversation looked like. At some point, the two of you had to come together and you had to hear a perspective that probably was somewhat wounding, right? Because you were trying to be helpful and supportive and build up, because one of our roles as leaders is to try to coach. Otherwise, we become the problem solver for every problem. And so we're trying to support and allow the teacher or the employee the ability to lead also, right? Because there's leaders at every level. And so I guess this goes into this question. So what frustrated you?
Well, I was a little bit frustrated with myself, that once I had the reflection on that, it was like, I could have handled that better, differently. But the same teacher, it was interesting. She also at one point said, I appreciate how you have challenged me to grow on some things. So, there was some good there as well. But I think the biggest frustration for me has been like you can't control. Like I think the how we relate to each other is so important, and we can't control all parties of that. And so we have to know how to respond in a way, not react. Reaction is, can make it worse. But how to respond in a way that is helpful to everyone involved as best as we can. And I think I felt like I was doing that initially, but I don't think I was.
There are two questions in these protocols. One is what got overlooked. And then there's another one later on that says, so what could you have done differently? And sometimes they're different, sometimes they're the same. So I'll ask you, what could you have done differently?
Well, I think what I would have done differently is I would have, when some of these emails and things were coming, this was a pattern of behavior that had happened. I would have picked up the telephone and called the parent, and I think I would have let the teacher know, like, hey, I'm going to call them and just, the questions that they have, if they have concerns or if they have critiques or feedback, all those things are legitimate, but it's not okay to communicate with you like that. I don't feel like that's okay. And so I'm going to call the parent and let them know that this just isn't okay. Not necessarily the underlying message. We want to hear your feedback, but the way that you're doing this is just not going to work for us. So if you want to continue, for us to hear you and have this communication, then these are the ground rules. Basically, this is what needs to stop. And I think that would have been the way to handle it. Instead of what I was doing with the teacher was really just trying to help her with her de-escalation, with like kind of avoiding some of the just language that was maybe more aggressive, and just kind of get to the heart of the issue, and also like show the parent that you care about their kids, show them that you're concerned about the situation. Because a lot of times, like you mentioned earlier, that's the thing that they're most interested in is, does this person care about my kid? They just want to see that the person on the other end that they don't really know that well is like invested in my kid's success, and not just, well, you didn't follow the rules, or you didn't turn that in on time, or you didn't, do this. All those things are part of it, but it's like, do they care about my kid?
Yeah. Do they know my child? Will they value and honor my child? Yeah.
Absolutely.
In the end, what was something that was good that came out of this situation?
Well, I think that I clearly gained some perspective through that, and have been able to, add that to my tool belt of, okay, I used to kind of handle these things this way, but maybe I need to be a little sooner to handle it this way, which I think was good. And then I think even for the teacher that, where maybe I was a little bit too, here, you can handle this, you've got this, here are some tips. I think that while what I did wasn't entirely helpful, I do think that through that process, she did thank me at another time, like, I appreciate that you believe in me and that you want me to grow. Underneath that, I think there was a little bit of, but in this situation, I really wish you would have, stepped in a little bit more. And I finally kind of got that. She never really said that outright, but there was enough there that I was able to, get that understanding. So, good comes out of almost every situation if you look for it, and if you look at it as an opportunity to learn and reflect.
Those were two takeaways that I had as you were telling your story and sharing your experience and being incredibly vulnerable, which is what human-centered leaders do, was that you were sending a message, I believe, that you had trust in this individual to be able to do this work and to lead it and to do it well and to represent your school and your community with such distinction. And I think that sometimes that's really hard when you're put into those roles. And I also think that your ability to take a step back and think about at what point might you have intervened, and to think about having maybe done it earlier, I think is also a profound reflection. It also sounds like, as you've now taken on this new role as a superintendent in a school district, that you've taken that learning and you've already described how you've applied maybe to jump in a little bit sooner, to be able to demonstrate to the people who work for you and report to you that you've got their backs. In the end, this podcast is designed to help those aspiring and early in their career and even established leaders learn from the experiences of other leaders. So with that in mind, and I know that you are only in your first year, but it sounds like from our conversation, you have great wisdom. What advice would you give to an aspiring leader?
Well, I think one thing that I've learned this year, I had been doing high school principal for so long that I didn't have the kind of the pursuit of mentoring that I've had this year. It's like I'm a beginner again. And so I am reaching out like constantly to people. What do you think about this? How could I do that? So I think even going back to my early principal days and really all the way through, I think just the having people that I am connecting with and asking questions and getting their feedback, I think is so valuable. So, I mean, that's not a unusual piece of advice that newer leaders get, that's for sure. But I think it's not always taken. And sometimes people want to do it themselves. And, you're always smarter when you have a team around you that you can rely on and that you can ask for wisdom.
You can't do this work alone. You must harvest the wisdom of those who have walked in your shoes, who are alongside you, so that you can become better. It's a lonely job, the superintendency. There are very few people you can talk to. At this point, when you're a principal, there are other principals potentially that you can talk to. When you're a superintendent, it doesn't mean that you can't rely on your team. They're the most important people around you. There are times, though, that you're trying to figure out what is the next step or what makes the most sense or what kind of process should I follow as I want to learn more and be better. And just as you noted, it's making sure that you're reaching out to those people who are in your network, in your region, to try to figure out how to do this job even better. My guest again today was David Geurin. And before I thank you, I'd like to encourage listeners to read your book. The title is Future Driven: Will Your Students Thrive in an Unpredictable World? And it's interesting because most leaders would agree that we're preparing children for an ever-changing and unpredictable world. But here's something that we know to be predictable, and I'll use your words. Teaching learners in this era of knowledge abundance requires teachers to take risks and for leaders to embrace change. We need to have a long-term perspective, and so do our students. David, thank you so much for being on our program, and I'm so happy for the children, families, and faculty members in Fair Play. I really appreciate your sharing your insights today.
Hey, thank you, Peter. I appreciate the opportunity to be on your show. It's been a real pleasure.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created the Daruma doll butterfly artwork. Imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It is a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. And I'm proud to be an imperfect leader, so I hope you'll join me next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader: Leadership in After Action.